I've come over from Belper, near Derby, but I study at Loughborough. I study Slavoj Žižek and contemporary critical theory, using lots of psychoanalysis and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do today, I won't give you any specifics or any case studies because it's been a long time since I've been able to talk knowledgeably about that. But what I will do is make an argument for the definition of volatility and why the contemporary political global order might be described as volatile. So I'll make an argument for why that might be the case. My argument for why that's the case is that it's explicable in terms of the kinds of critiques that psychoanalysis can allow us to make. And in order to explain and stress that point, I'll take you through a kind of a potted history of psychoanalysis, specifically French psychoanalysis as I understand it, and then make an argument. So my argument in terms of psychoanalysis argues that for the coherency of an individual or a societal symbolic framework to be maintained, there has to be an object that is unreachable in some sense, that there will be an object, an order. The psychoanalyst Lacan would call it a patriarchy of symbols, needs to be maintained in respect of an object that is fundamentally unreachable. The unreachability of the object is paradoxically what allows us to go about our daily lives. So a good example from Žižek himself is he talks about Kinder eggs. So if anybody ever had a Kinder egg, you've got the chocolate outside and you've got the toy in the middle. Now, Kinder eggs, why do Kinder eggs sell so well? Nobody really wants the toy inside, but you race through the chocolate, you enjoy the chocolate as a function of trying to reach the toy. You don't particularly want it, you chuck it away, but it nevertheless renders the outside more enjoyable. So I think that's part of what psychoanalysis argues in respect of politics, that there will be, for any political creed, be it liberalism, be it Soviet Marxism, there will be some sense of utopia, some sense of the future, that it needs to be perceived as roughly feasible within the coordinates of a symbolic constellation, but structurally and actually it will ultimately prove unreachable. However, it will facilitate the dominant means by which we integrate with each other, our relationship to objects and governance and so on. So, to take you through psychoanalysis and to make this point, what I'd say first is that the important thing to remember about Freud is that Freud, the reason I bring this up is because it's a way to radicalise Freud in the contemporary landscape of, if anybody is interested in issues around therapy, that the dominant mode is obviously not Freud, that people will be given, for example, by the NHS, they'll be given cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the reduction of experience to numbers and quantitative means and so on. That the way to radicalise Freud in the contemporary landscape is to make the argument that Freud never saw himself the role of psychoanalysis as the bringing of the patient, what in psychoanalysis is called the analysand, to a state of happiness. So Freud never believed that the purpose of therapy, psychoanalytic therapy, was to bring the patient to a state of happiness, that rather, in respect of what I've just said about the unreachable object and the volatility of the symbolic network that constitutes the individual, Freud would either have seen the task of the psychoanalytic therapist to render the fixation of the individual in respect of that unreachable object to be more coherent, more streamlined, or perhaps what would be worse in a Freudian patient that would turn up to see a Freudian analyst, that they would have no sense of that unreachable object. That's an idea that I want to leave and bring forward again at the end in a societal and a global context. So for Freud, it wasn't about making the individual happy, it was simply about the illumination of the inconsistencies in a symbolic network and nexus that would allow the individual at least to, the historical function of psychoanalysis would be to streamline or render visible the nature of a symbolic network to allow the individual to enjoy. that if the individual was aware of fundamentally the unreachability of their object, then they would be liberated to expend enjoyment and to be able to live in a stable and meaningful way. So the guy that I'm really interested in my PhD for the purposes of this is a guy called Jacques Lacan, who saw himself as returning to, but in the process of doing so, radicalised Freud. He gave the kind of somewhat Hippocratic doctor-type Freud a social and sociopolitical language, which is why, for me, psychoanalysis is pertinent to bring up at a conference on international politics. So for Lacan, Lacan's big phrase was, the unconscious is structured like a language. So where in original Freudianism, the sense of the unconscious, the well of instinctive desires and impulses was fundamentally a kind of individuated thing. It was separated out, lonely people or cut off, distantiated people going to see a therapist. For Lacan, the language of and the language pertaining to the unconscious was something that could be applied to politics first and foremost. So for Lacan, the dominant mode of language that operates and governs a society that would be organised in respect to this unreachable object, what Lacan called the object cause of desire, that it would be something that could be explained socially and that it would have political ramifications. So Lacan grafted Freud's clinical languages fundamentally onto the colonial and the class-based conflicts of Parisian, specifically, society, but also in the broader French context of the 40s, the 50s and the 60s specifically. So Lacan has a good quote here. Well, this is actually from a guy called Peter Starr, who writes on Lacan, that he talks about the role of this object cause of desire in the sustenance of the coherence of the individual mind and the societal mind in respect of this object cause of desire. What leads us to behave socially, what leads us to become what Aristotle would have called homo politicus, that what takes us and makes us social. So Peter Starr says, in accordance with the first and foremost of Lacan's 4 propositions on the ethics of psychoanalysis, the only thing one can be guilty of is giving ground relative to one's desire. That would be something that comes up in the liberal debates of French society in the 60s. Oedipus, which is a figure from classical literature, Sophocles, that Freud used as a case study, remains unyielding right to the end, demanding everything, giving up nothing, absolutely unreconciled. His only passion, but it is an all-encompassing one for Lacan, is the passion for knowledge, or more specifically, the desire to know the last word on desire. And so, writes Peter Starr, the disfigured Oedipus thus proves himself to be a consummate practitioner of that entrée en jeu, coming into subjecthood proposed as an imperative by Freud's wo es war, soll ich werden, where it was, the I must come to be. That strictly impossible imperative to accede to the truth of one's desire that grounds what Lacan calls Freudian aesthetic experience. So the argument that I want to make is a tricky one because within the context of psychoanalysis, the structural unreachability of the object cause of desire is, if you like, the organising principle, that psychoanalysts would see the presence of a utopia or of a utopian vision and the unreachability of that as that which knits together the coherency, the positive coherency of political society. Certainly Lacan would have seen it like that. The general argument that I think I want to sketch out in respect of the word volatility in the title of the conference today is that more and more we are witnessing, for me, a frantic scurrying around, a searching for that object of desire that I remember back in just before the millennium. The worry was about the millennium bug and the the structural flaws in our systems of technology that render us able to behave in certain ways. What occurred to me is that the difference between then and now is that the principal problem now for me, and this can be in the questions, we can look at this in the context of liberalism and the Western European political project, that the problem now is that instead of being structured in respect of the unreachability of utopia, that we find ourselves casting around for precisely a tangible vision of utopia that makes sense to us, that in a very concrete context, the dissatisfaction of American voters with either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. So I want to finish with a quote that I think exemplifies what I'm trying to say from a novel from 2001. It's called Life of Pi, and it won the Man Booker Prize in the following year. It's a story about a boy who escapes a cruise liner. They're transporting a zoo and all its animals from India to, I think, to America, and the boat wrecks, and the boy ends up in a lifeboat with 3 animals, a lion, a hyena, and I can't remember the other one. But so at the very end, when everything kind of comes to its fruition, that the boy lets slip that the animals may have represented people, the lifeboat may have. His symbolisation of people and the conflicts between them in the lifeboat, perhaps symptomatic of our society today, is that the difficulty to come to terms with the imminence of violence and structural violence means that he symbolised the people in terms of animals. There's a conversation at the end of the novel between 2 policemen that are trying to file their report. So the first policeman says, "So tell me, since it makes no factual difference to you and you can't prove the question either way, which story do you prefer? Which is the better story? The story with animals or the story without animals?" 2, that's an interesting question. 1, the story with animals, question mark. 2, yes, the story with animals is the better story. Thank you. And so it goes with God. So for me, the problem with so many political projects today, and the reason for the definition of volatility, is that more and more the political theory debates that we have tend to be explicable in terms of this absence of a coherent, unifying humanitarian project, and we tend to become more and more sucked into reflexive conversations about belief, which I'm aware that I'm contributing to. Now, something that might cut against what I'm saying, and that I'm looking forward to discussing, will be something that occurred to me just before. Something like Hart and Negri's idea of the multitude, where there is a plethora of emergent discourses that needs no discourse of the master. But nevertheless, the argument that I make is about this absence of what Lacan calls the objective cause of desire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seth.